A Buddhist story tells us that there was once a poor man beaten down by life, empty of hope and ambition, lying in a foul gutter. And there was a sangha, a religious community, a teaching community with great heart and an open spirit. And the community embraced the poor man as one of their own, and the community patiently loved and patiently taught him until he became whole. This man joined the community in love and eventually became the finest teacher priest, the finest Roshi the community had ever known. My topic this morning is ministry. But I'm not going to talk about the ministry of the called professional minister. I'm going to talk about congregations. The ministry of congregations, what congregations are for, and how congregations do what they do when they do them well. If you ask any group of Unitarian Universalists what their congregations are for, they would have answers. You might say congregations are meant to be shelter, to be places of peace and compassion and inspiration, to be sanctuary, or that perhaps congregations are for recognizing every person as she or he is, as Penny said, each person as important, worthy. Or that congregations are for working to create that kind of recognition, that kind of sanctuary and justice for other people in the world. We might say that congregations exist to create beauty, or that congregations are centers of learning, communities where thinking changes sometimes, attitudes broaden, caring grows. All of these, probably much more. All of it is indeed congregational work. And a minister helps and guides and makes some of it real along the way, but it's not about and it's certainly not for the minister. So, why do it? Surely we are, all of us, busy enough. Why do we work so hard to make these dreams come true? Because they are dreams, and we know that we will always fall short. Sometimes it is hard not to wonder what difference a congregation could possibly make in the world. But that may not be quite the right question. Perhaps we should wonder how being in a congregation, how holding up these dreams, how seeing them as possible makes a difference in us. How it changes people to be here. There was once a poor woman beaten down by life, empty of hope and ambition, lying in a gutter. And there was a sangha, a religious community, a teaching community with great heart and an open spirit. And the community embraced the woman as one of their own. And the community patiently loved and patiently taught her until she became whole. This woman joined the community in love and eventually became the finest teacher priest, the finest Roshi the community had ever known. That story is taken from a book about congregations by a now retired Unitarian Universalist minister named Ann Heller. And here's how she continues, what she says right after she tells that story. Each word and deed of the story is within the talents and capacities of any religious community that is willing to love with an open heart and teach with respect and compassion. Such a community lifts everyone involved to a higher nature. And this nature is the heart of ministry, the heart of a congregation. It is how the congregation ministers to one another and how it is ministered to. I think Ann Heller is right. Such a story of transformation is both amazing, almost unbelievable, and also absolutely within the normal work that congregations do. Congregational life is powerful because we are able to change and be changed by and with one another. That very idea might seem to be going against the grain a bit. Unitarian Universalism strives to be the religion with a difference. For a time a few decades ago, Unitarian Universalism was referred to as the religion that was trying not to be a religion. You've perhaps heard this. We assure ourselves and our visitors that we are not about personal conversion, unlike those other religions. We celebrate and affirm each other's inherent worth and dignity, which is often interpreted as permission to be whoever we already are, along with an implied promise that nothing too difficult will be asked of us. But in reality, I think that most of us arrive hoping to become something more than we already are. We arrive hoping to be changed, to become happier, clearer, more articulate and more peaceful and more just. I know I did. The interesting thing is how that happens. It was on a Sunday a decade or so ago, the truth is it's frighteningly close to 2 decades, that I was doing a service and I needed a story about heroes. The sermon was on a difficult topic. I had called it violence and justice a month or so before as the newsletter was going to press. It was hard enough to write. And then I remembered that the children would be there for the beginning of the service. And that made it harder. I needed to say something that was relevant to them as well as to the grown-ups. I wanted to get everybody thinking about winning and losing, about right and wrong, about heroes and what they fight for and how they do it. And I didn't know how to do that without scaring the children or preaching at them inappropriately. As I was waiting for inspiration to strike, I fell back on the preacher's, one of the most reliable delaying tactics. I checked my email, and there it was, an electronic gift from a member of the congregation, the story that I told this morning, the one about baseball and winners and losers and perfection. At the end of that story, way back almost 20 years ago, I looked at the children and I asked them, okay, so who's the hero in that story? Hands went up. It was the boy, Shay, because he won the game. Or it was Shay's teammates for letting him play in the first place. They were the heroes. And then Ben spoke up. Ben was 5. He and his family were new in the congregation that year, and Ben was still very much finding his way. But he loved to sit right in front during conversation time, that's what we called it in that congregation. And he listened so hard that his little brow furrowed, and the depth of his attention was all that I needed to remember why we were there. Ben spoke up. And he said in a clear voice, gesturing so much that he nearly toppled over, you know, I think the other team was the heroes because they didn't win. First, they threw the ball over the first baseman's head, and he did this, and then they threw it over the third baseman's head, and the boy ran, and he made it all the way home. Ben paused for a moment, and every other person in that sanctuary paused too and waited. And then he said, those kids did everything wrong, and they let the other team win, and they were the heroes. We learn in the most unexpected and unpredictable ways. I will tell you the truth, I had not been harboring high hopes for that story. I just wanted to notice out loud with the kids that there are different ways to think about justice and winning. To the adults in my wonderful, educated sermon, which I no longer have a copy of, I would talk about mythology and culture and politics and history and concepts of God. And I hoped that they would take away some new thoughts about redemptive violence and restorative justice. And perhaps some of them did. Maybe a few even remembered those ideas for more than a couple of days. But everyone who was there remembered Ben and how he taught the rest of us as he was learning himself. One of the things I like best about life in religious community, even though it is a little disconcerting, is how full of surprises our shared life is. It is not easy to predict what will happen, where the energy or the questions or the hurt or the healing, the problems, the creativity, where will it all show up next? The future is not ours to see, ever. And it feels especially so now in our rapid times. It isn't that planning and long-range goals are pointless, on the contrary, but though congregations can develop a plan to attract new people, more young families, because it's good for the budget and the programs, we can never know ahead of time when a Ben will show up to remind us of the important stuff that we just might need to relearn. And it's not just children who surprise and teach. Grown-ups can get thrown for a loop in a good way, too, by some new idea or a really important project, by someone who cares enough to show up when you actually need them to, or even by a person who thinks differently and one day takes the risk of sharing his or her wonderful and strange ideas in a way that you can actually hear them, and your heart beats a little lighter. We cannot plan for each other. We are individually and especially collectively too surprising to predict. Isn't that delightful? Some of you are familiar with the 12th century Persian poet that we know as Rumi. Rumi was a sheikh. He was an important man. His life was successful and pretty normal, even predictable. Until one day, a stranger, a man named Shams, came into Rumi's life and changed it forever. Shams was a wandering dervish. You all know that a whirling dervish, that they really were real, still are, and they're Sufis. Shams was a dervish, and he had been traveling throughout the East for years, searching and praying, he said, for a companion who could endure his company. He and Rumi found that in one another for a time. Not a very long time, as it turned out, but for a time they were companions. Through his love for Shams, Rumi discovered and wrote about the deepest longing in himself, longing for love, not just in his life, but in the world, in the universe, longing for peace that can last, longing for joy, especially joy, in the middle of a world where joy seems frankly foolish. Searching and praying for companions who can endure our company. Perhaps that is what we can be for one another, even though we will disappoint one another too. Guaranteed. And we will need to decide to stay anyway. I have seen and felt that happen. Have you? Has someone offered you a piece of your puzzle that you didn't know you were missing? Have you felt yourself drawn to be more generous, more open-minded, more compassionate, more full of joy than you thought you were? Did you feel yourself carried along and know yourself, even if it was just for an hour, as a hero? The companions around us, the 5-year-olds, the venerated elders, and everyone in between, we're all each other's guides. That's why we're here. When we pay attention, we can notice the depths of goodness, of hope, and of new creation in one another. And when we see that in another person, we grow the capacity to know it in ourselves. are many stories about flower communion that have developed over the years. Come on up, kids. We're going to decant these flowers and pass them out. I think the one that is compelling to me is the idea that together we make a kind of a bumpy and irregular but nevertheless beautiful bouquet, because each one of us is different and beautiful at the same time. And the ritual of the flower communion is you bring a flower and you take home a different flower. So we're going to put the flowers in baskets, and